And so there's a danger in putting your trust in things. But you know, there's another problem. When we put our trust in people, you know how people are. Oftentimes we trust them and they disappoint us. We need them to be faithful, but oftentimes they're fickle. We need them to be honest, but if you're not careful, they're dishonest. We need them to be loyal and stick with us, but oftentimes they're disloyal. And so, you know, we often need people to be strong, but oftentimes they're just too weak. We have to be careful about putting our trust in people. Because, you know, people and things are not something that you can really depend on. I know that some of you have had this issue. I know that you've had people to take advantage of you. Now, you don't have to really say amen, because I know if you're human, and I know if you've been around any people for any considerable amount of time, somebody has taken advantage of you. I know they have, because oftentimes people take your kindness to be your weakness. Yeah, but what they don't realize, and it's something I've learned, is that it takes more strength to be kind than to be mean. It takes more strength. It takes more might to give other than to receive, because it's not easy to give to people you can't trust. But you know, it takes more strength to be able to do that. And so I know that it's hard to trust people all the time. I know, because oftentimes you find that people really, you know, I'm not a pessimist, but let's be honest, that oftentimes you find out that people mean you no good. I know we want to, and I'll tell you, I'm the first guy that thinks the best of everybody. I'm just like that. My wife gets on to me all the time, says, you got to see who they are first. I said, no, baby, I believe that it's good in everybody. And because I believe that there's good in everybody, I just go ahead and trust you first. But let me tell you now, I'll tell you this too about me, is that I'll trust you first, but if you burn me, I'm done. That's just me. I'm going to trust you first. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. But if you give me a doubt, I'm done. So I'm going to give you the benefit, but if you create the doubt, then I'm done. But I know sometimes it's hard to trust people, because oftentimes people are trying to tear you down. They're trying to stab you in the back. They're trying to do you in. And so there is a sense that there's a trust factor. And we don't know who to trust, when to trust, how to trust. But let me tell you, brothers and sisters, let me put on my counseling hat. One thing I know, that if we don't trust somebody, we run the risk of struggling to build meaningful relationships. You got to trust somebody. You got to confide in somebody, because if you don't talk to somebody, sometime you run the risk of being all by yourself. And I know that it's hard. I know that there's a trust factor that runs through all of us. And I understand that we always wonder inside our minds, even if we don't say it out loud, can I trust them? Can I share this with them? If I tell them this, will the whole world find out? If I tell them this, will they take it and use it against me? I know, because my mother had this thing. She would say often, if a dog, bring a bone. he'll carry one back. And so I get a little bit leery of people who bring bones, because my fear is that they're going to carry one back. But you know what I learned? I learned as I matured to give them the bone that you want them to carry back. Hear me now. Hear me now. If they bring a bone, and you know they're going to carry one back, go ahead and give them a bone that you want them to carry back. And when you hear it, you say, yeah, I know. I know where you got that from, because I gave it to them. See, that's how you do it. But let me get on to this text. The Bible teaches us in Psalms 33 and 21 that God's name in his word is worthy of our trust. And then in Proverbs 3 and 5, the Bible says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not in your own understanding. Here you go. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he shall direct your path. And so really, the bottom line is you can't trust. But the trust that you have has to be in the Lord. Let me say this. Even if you think that a person or people have it out to get you, you still can trust that the Lord is not going to let them get you. So you got to understand that even though they may be out to get you, you got to trust the Lord that they can't get you. You got to believe that he has put a shield of protection around you. And if the Lord has put a shield of protection around you, you don't have to worry. You don't have to be scared. You don't have to be concerned about what they are trying to do. Hear what I'm saying to you now. You can trust that God is on your side. Let's look at this text real quick. I know the kickoff has already happened, but just hold on. I'm going to let you out of here quick. Really, they probably got the pregame show going on, so you just relax. But let's look at the psalmist here just for a minute. When we look at this text, what I see that the psalmist is doing is he's losing hope in God. You know why? I know that because he began to do what you do. He started asking the why question. He said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? He said, God, why have you turned away from me completely? God, why are you so far away from me? God, why are you so far that you can't even hear the words of my groaning? The psalmist here is losing faith in his God. He says, now God, I'm crying out all day, really, but you're not answering me. I'm crying out at night, but you still are not answering me. And I guarantee you, you don't have to say amen, but you can relate to what that psalmist is saying. Sometimes you feel like God has turned completely away from you. Sometimes you feel like God is so far away from your situation, you don't know what to do. Sometimes you feel like that you're crying out and you're crying out and you're crying out, and God can't even hear you when you're crying. I just know, because we have an issue with trust, we believe, just like this psalmist, that God is not there for us. And there's times that we sit just and cry just and believe just and lose faith just like the psalmist. I know there's some times, because we're human, we all have the same human experience. I bet you the times when those bills are due and all that money is gone, you wonder, where is God? There are times when you're sick and you just believe you just not going to ever get well. You wonder, where is God? Times when no matter what you do to try to make your children be good people and good children, there's nothing you can do to seem to help them, and they just keep on doing what you tell them not to do. You wonder, where is this God that I put all of my hope in and I put all of my trust in? These times when your loved one is suffering and you keep saying, God, could you please give them some relief, and seem like God is not going to show up. There's times. There's times when you're searching for a yes, but all God is saying is no. I know that when that happens, you're just like the psalmist. You're wondering, where is God? You're wondering, does he hear you? You're wondering if he's ever going to show up. And I know when you say, why, God, why, God, why, God, I know that it's hard to trust God in times like them. I know when there's no questions, then you have answers. I know that you begin to sort of be like the psalmist. When it appears like all hope is gone, you sort of get like the psalmist. But I want to tell you today, if you're wondering who you can trust, I want to say to you today, but you can still trust God. You can still, no matter how many times you say why, no matter how many times you call and it seems like he is not answering, no matter how many times you believe he doesn't hear your cry, you can still trust in the name of the Lord. Look, this here, you got to understand that what you have to continue to do is to put your hope, to put your faith, to put your trust in God. Listen, if you don't put it in God, there's no other place you can put it that you're going to get a real answer. And when I look at this Psalms, and these points are 4 points, but they're short points. I won't be on them long. But I want you to get these points. When I look at this Psalm, there's 4 reasons that the psalmist gives us that we can trust God. The first reason is because God is holy. God is holy. Here the psalmist is speaking of the godliness of who God is. He's God. But what he's saying is that he's God. He's God, and he's God all by himself. He's God. He's the Alpha. He's the Omega. He's the beginning. He's the end. He's God. The psalmist says you can trust him because he's God. He's God. He's God. He's Elohim. He's God. He's El Shaddai. He's God. He's Elohim. He's the Most High God. He's God. And because he's God, simply because he's God, you can trust him. Just because you don't see him, just because you don't hear him, you yet can trust him. Listen, he's God. There's nobody like him. There's nobody stronger than him. There's nobody higher than him. So who else can you trust? He's a holy God. He's the God of the universe. He's a sovereign God. He is our God. He's a holy and great God. And because he's God, you can trust him. The second point is that you can trust him because, if you look at this, I love this one. Your ancestors trusted him. Here the text says that your fathers, when he used that word fathers, he was referring to the fathers of the faith. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He said, now, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob trusted God, and because they trusted him, you can trust him. Well, let me bring it a little closer to home and sit it in your lap. Someone you know trusted God. Maybe it was your mother who trusted God. And so you know you can trust God. Maybe it was your father who trusted God. So you know you can trust God. Maybe it was your grandmother or your grandfather who trusted God. And so your ancestors, those who came before you, trusted God. So you know that God can be trusted. Listen. Listen here. This is Black History Month, isn't it? This Black History Month. And there's some folks who trusted God way before our time. And when I think about it, they had to trust God. You know those folks who arrived on that ship? The only way they arrived on that ship alive is they had to trust God. You know, those people who worked out in the field, sun up to sundown, those people, they survived because they had to trust God. Those people who worked in the house cleaning these folks' house in every imaginable way, they survived because they trusted God. You know, those people like my daddy who worked in the mill for some 40 years under situations and circumstances that none of us probably could do, I know he survived because he trusted God. See, our ancestors had it within them to trust God. And since they were able to trust God through circumstances and events that we could never do because we too modern, but because they were able to trust God, you can trust God. And since you can trust God, your children should know that they can trust God. And because your children can trust God and you can trust God, your grandchildren ought to know that they can trust God. And because you, your children, and your grandchildren know that they can trust God, your great-grandchildren ought to be able to trust God. You can trust God. Because those who came before you put their trust, put their hope, put their faith in the God who brought them through. And if they can trust God to bring them through, you can trust God to bring you through. He's a God who delivered them. He delivered them. He provided for them. He protected them. He set them free. And that's the same God. It's the same one. If he did it for them, he can do it for you. My third point is this. You can trust God because God hears your cry. Yeah, I know it's true. I know some nights, late in the midnight hour, when nobody else is listening, and your pillow is soaking wet, the only person who can hear you is God. In fact, if we're honest, the only person we want to hear us is God. We're too ashamed to let somebody else hear us crying like that. And so we want to make sure that God is the only one. Have you ever, I tell you, I'm transparent. I don't have nothing to hide. There's often times that I'll go in that shower and turn that shower on, and I'll get right there since the water's running anyway. And I just let my water run. And I just cry out to God. My wife don't know it's happening. My son didn't know it was happening. But I know God knew it was happening. And I tell you right now, I'm so glad that I serve a God who can hear me when I cry. And he don't laugh at me. He don't talk about me. He don't ridicule me. He helped me. And I tell you right now, that same God who heard my cry, who heard your ancestors' cry, is the same God who will hear your cry. Listen, early in the morning, before you have to go to a job that you really don't want to go to, sometimes you got to cry. And I promise you, if you cry out to God, he hears your cry. And sometimes You at work and you got to go out on a lunch break and sit in your car because the day's just not going so well. And you got to cry a little bit. Well, I'll tell you that that same God is sitting in the seat with you, and he hears the cries that you cry. Listen, you can trust God because he hears your cry and he don't shame you. He just hears you, and he just cares about you, and he just comforts you when you're crying. Listen, I know it's hard sometimes, and I know you got to cry sometimes, but just know that God hears your cry. He hears you when everybody else stops listening. He hears you when your best friend turns their back on you. He hears you. God knows your cry. And in fact, you belong to him. So when you start crying, he's just opened his arm and just rock you. You don't know it's happening, but he's doing it. All of a sudden, a sense of comfort comes and your tears go away. It's the God that you can trust. You know that you didn't do it yourself. You know that that person you talked on the phone for 3-4 hours couldn't stop you from crying. But it was God who heard your cry, who dried those tears. You can trust God because he is a God who hears you when you cry. I love this. If you look in verse 5, the Bible said that cried to God and he saved them. But I like the second point he made. He said he cried to God and he did not make him ashamed. So in other words, you can cry to God and he says it's all right. I'm not going to put your business in the street. I'm not going to tell people you suffering. I'm not going to tell people what you're going through. I'm going to sit there with you and I'm going to wipe those tears right out of your eyes, and I'm going to comfort you, and I'm going to give you some peace, and I'm going to give you some strength to keep on moving. So you can trust God because he hears when you cry. So if you want to do like me, turn the shower on, the same water that's falling from the shower will just blend in with the water that's falling from your eyes. But the beautiful thing about it, you know how that steam is in there when you take your good old shower? I got a feeling when you're crying like that, that Spirit of God kind of steams up the room and kind of fall down on you and kind of help you dry those tears up. God hears your cry. You can trust him. Cry all you want. Cry until you get tired. But I tell you this, God will wipe the tears from your eyes. Listen, you can trust God because he's the one who wipes the tears from your eyes. My fourth point is that you can trust God because you got a history with him. In verses 9 and 10, the psalmist began to remind God of their history. He said, now God, you brought me out of the womb. God, you made me trust you. And I like when he began to talk about, he says, now, God, when I was a baby, he talked about sucking milk. He hadn't been talking about when he was a baby because that's the only time we've been sucking milk. And so here he is. He said, God, when I was a baby, you made me trust you. So we got some history here. When I was in my mother's womb, you made me trust you. When I came out and I was getting my nourishment, you made me trust you. And so in other words, the psalmist said, now God, look, I'm in trouble right now. You made me trust you then. And so you can't be too far from me now. Look, I'm in trouble right now. I got trouble knocking at my door. And since I know that we got some history together, I know that you told me I could trust you before I got here, and you told me I could surely trust you once I got here. I know because of our history, I can trust you. The psalmist was going through something. And I know when I look at verses 6 and 7, he began to sort of talk about himself. He says, I'm a worm. I'm not a man. He said, I'm scorned by all men. I'm despised by all people. He began to talk. What I think, he just started feeling sorry for himself. He says, I'm going through something. He said, everybody's mocking me. Everybody's insulting me. Everybody, when they see me, they shaking their heads saying, look at him, look at him. But the psalmist says now, and I'm going to show you this point as I hurry to a close. After the psalmist got finished feeling sorry for himself, if you notice something in verse 8, in verse 8, the psalmist, after he finished feeling sorry for himself, the Bible did something interesting. It identified his enemies, because in verse 8, it said, his enemies basically said, he trusted God, let him call on him. Look at there. He says now, he going through all this. And you know what your enemy is saying? You going through all that. And since you trust God, let him come rescue you. Let him come deliver you. Let him come, because the text said his enemies talking now, that God delighted in him. Know what that means? What that means is, and that's good news, because your haters know that if you trust in God, that God will come and he'll rescue you. God will come and he'll deliver you. God will come and he'll provide for you. God will come and he'll show you the favor that he has on your life. But you got to understand, you got a history with God. And in that history, God has already showed you what he will and can do. Don't you forget that if God did it before, he can surely do it again. Listen, you got to sort of have a thought like Job. Job said, though they slay me, yet I will trust him. And there's an old song that says, I will trust in the Lord until I die. It didn't say, I'll trust in the Lord as long as everything going good. It didn't say that. It says, I'm going to trust in the Lord until I die. So that means that along this journey, there's going to be moments that it's going to be hard to trust in the Lord. Along this journey, there's going to be moments that God is going to seem like he's far from you. On this journey, there's going to be times it's going to seem like the Lord doesn't hear your cry. But listen, let me tell you something. The psalmist said, the songwriter said, that I'm going to trust in the Lord until I die. So let me tell you something, brothers and sisters. You got to trust God if you're up on the hill. You got to trust in God if you're down in the valley. You got to trust in God when you're up and doing well. You got to trust God when you're down and wondering if you're going to get back up. You got to trust God all the time. Because let me tell you something. You can trust God because it's the same God that came and blessed and took care of our ancestors. It's the same God who dried the tears from your eyes the last time that you cried all night. It's the same God that healed your body the last time you were sick and they said you couldn't get well. It's the same God that made a way out of no way when they said there was no way. It's the same God who promised you that I would never leave you or forsake you. It's the same God. You can trust God no matter what you're going through, no matter where you are, no matter what's happening in your life, no matter who's attacking you, no matter who's after you, no matter what's trying to destroy you, you can trust God.
Oh God, oh Lord, everything I gave to you. Oh God, oh Lord, withholding nothing, withholding.